Are there any questions that you sit there and just are surprised after they read the book and they talk to you that why aren't people asking a specific question? You know, what questions do they miss?
Oh, sure. So one of my favorites that oftentimes people don't ask, they sometimes will answer it, I think, implicitly for themselves, but they really need to be asking it explicitly. What's more important, experience or drive? And when they'll ask me that question occasionally, you know, when they do bring that up, and they should bring it up a lot more, but I would say, well, you know, it really kind of depends on the position itself. But I would encourage you maybe to compare two hypothetical candidates. Let's say candidate number one is low in drive, but has substantial industry experience. So maybe somebody who's built up a great book of business early in their career that maybe they're focused a little bit more now on shepherding. Okay, great, that's number one. Candidate number two maybe has less industry experience, but they're high on drive. So although that second candidate, you can imagine, may take a little bit more time to get up to speed, he or she is doing all that they can to kind of learn the ropes. And when they do, if you look at over time, let's say on day one, you've got both of these folks, they want to make a good impression. Well, obviously the person with more experience is going to have an easier time doing that. And it's going to look like, wow, you know, experience really does make the difference here. Look at this high experienced person, you know, he's coming right out of the gate real strong, but that high drive person is watching. And over time, you know, as time goes on, 6 months go by, 8 months go by, you're going to start to see a crisscross, if you will, because that high drive person, once they do learn the ropes, they're going to end up surpassing, we find, the first candidate's performance. So, of course, you know, don't get confused or make any mistake. When you need a hunter salesperson who's ready to hit the ground running and start producing from day one, then you really need somebody with both the industry experience and the drive. But if you have the resources, bottom line, to train the candidate in your industry and in your sales process, our research and experience has shown that drive is by far the more important factor before hiring. So that's one key question. And you know, a corollary to that, sometimes, again, people don't ask this question, does a high-drive salesperson need training? Oftentimes, again, people will read the book, they'll love the idea, okay, great, let's get a high-drive person, they'll put the process in place, they'll use testing, they use interviewing, they get somebody who's high in drive, great, let's throw him to the wolves. He knows what he's doing. And, again, if you have somebody, say, for example, just out of school, and you throw them into a position where now they're being asked to do some things that maybe they just don't know how to do, kind of sales 101, if you will, that they need. Yes, the person's high in drive, but if they don't know what to do, they're still not going to be able to perform, and they're going to be miserable because they've set these high goals for themselves, but they don't know how to meet them. They don't know the basic things to do. So if you're getting someone that, again, has high drive, they may very well need training if they don't have either the sales 101 experience or the industry background that you need that person to have. So it's important to assess both of those elements. Another key question that people don't ask is, again, another corollary to that, what about the other elements of the sales, what you might think of as the sales ecosystem, as some researchers will call it. You know, so when we look at all of those elements, there are also things that come into play, like, again, fit with the management style, as we alluded to earlier, fit with the compensation plan, fit with the company culture. That's so important, too, because you can get somebody that's strong in those characteristics, but if they're not a good cultural fit, if you just don't like the guy, you know, they're still not going to get along. So it's important, again, when we're hiring someone that we cover all of those bases, if you will, and really make sure that we are comfortable in each of those elements, that the person is going to be high potential and be a good match for us. So those would probably be the key ones that I wish people would ask me more.
Great information. I do find it interesting that people get so focused on industry experience that sometimes they overlook great candidates just because they don't have that. And drive is definitely, you got to have the personality, you got to have the wherewithal when it comes to, you know, knocking on the doors, being that hunter, you know, getting out there day in and day out trying to accomplish something, and, you know, not having that little spark of flame go out because they just keep hearing no.
Yep.
The people with drive are going to work past that, and they always have that in the back of them, and it's very important.
Yep, and that's the challenge that companies will have, is look at the person who, again, has the experience, and maybe they've been successful previously. So let's think, oh, right, you know, why do we even need to bother using a test with this person? I mean, look at the track record. Well, the key question is, are they going to continue to bring the same degree of effort to bear for you? And the classic scenario, for example, is you have a smaller company that sees somebody who's been very successful at, say, a much larger company, say a company with a great degree of brand recognition, if you will. And they may lure this person over with the idea of, okay, you're going to be in more of an entrepreneurial environment, and that sounds great. But what they need to think about is what made that person successful in that larger environment. Was it their own effort purely? Or was it the fact that that brand recognition, that collateral material, et cetera, was opening doors for them and they were a little bit more of a closer? And do they, at this point, have that same degree of intensity, if you will? It's important to test for that, and you'll oftentimes be very surprised. And that's a challenge a lot of companies have, too, is the vast majority of tests, unfortunately, out there, there are a lot of sales tests. We find the majority are far too easy for sales candidates to kind of size up the test, figure out what it's looking for, and kind of just fake their way through. So it's important to use the sort of format that we're using on our test, forced choice, when you're looking at a test. So, again, the way a forced choice question works is for each question, the person gets a series of 3 statements, and typically they will all sound positive. So a question, for example, may say something like, I consider myself a leader, I have great relationship skills, I'm very organized. Okay, now which of these is most like you and which is least like you? So obviously that then forces the candidate to make some very tough distinctions. But then it gives us a much better sense of their real priorities. And, of course, as they're working their way through the test, we're constantly monitoring their consistency as they respond to those questions. Because, as you can imagine, if the person does try to fake the test, it's going to be very difficult for them to remember consistently what they ranked most and least across the entire assessment. So if they do try to do that, there's always going to be a flag placed in the report. So it's designed to be very robust for you in that regard as a measure of drive.